This is our excerpt from Vortext, Chapter 1, A Surprise at Sea. Captain Charles Moore felt the wind across the North Pacific Ocean die to a whisper. A few weeks earlier, it had filled the sails of the Alguita, pushing the white 50-foot-long, 15-meter-long sailboat west from California to Hawaii in the 1997 Trans-Pacific Yacht Race. He carried a trophy for third place and was enjoying brisk winds pushing him and his crew back home to California. Until now. Moore had scanned weather reports and turned the Alguita's bow southeast. It had entered an expansive ocean that was as still as a painting. Sailors usually try to avoid the North Pacific Ocean. The weather there is not too stormy or unpredictable, but too calm. Legends tell of desperate sailors waiting for so long for wind that they had to conserve drinking water by drowning their cargo of livestock. Sailors and scientists now understand that this quiet, expansive ocean is in the center of a gyre, a whirlpool that is thousands of miles wide. Powerful currents flow around the outer edges, like rivers through the ocean. Driven by the wind and Earth's rotation, the currents sweep west across the Pacific Ocean and up the coast of Asia. Then they move east across the ocean, down the west coast of North America, and west to begin the cycle again. The water encircled by the currents turns clockwise, sluggishly. Moore's modern sailboat was equipped with diesel engines, a system to make seawater drinkable, and a radio to call for help. Even so, a detour across these calm waters would haunt him. It would convince him that the ocean held a danger so great that it threatened all the survival not only of his crew, but of organisms all over the globe. On August 8th, while standing on deck, Moore saw something unexpected. Here and there, odd bits and flakes speckled the ocean's surface. He later wrote in the book Plastic Ocean how a sea captain's chance discovery launched a determined quest to save the oceans. He was disturbed because the objects were plastic. He said it looked as if a giant salt shaker had sprinkled bits of plastic onto the surface of the ocean. Each day he scanned the water and found that, no matter the time of day or how many times a day I looked, it's never more than a few minutes before I sight a plastic morsel bobbing by. A bottle here, a bottle cap there, scraps of plastic film, fragments of rope or fishing net, broken down bits of former things. For 7 days, the Alguita traveled more than 1,000 miles with Moore, noticing that there was always there plastic shards, fluttering like lost moths in the surface waters of the deep, remote ocean. Moore returned to Alamitos Bay, California, where he had spent his youth swimming, surfing, and sailing in the Pacific Ocean. By the 1980s, he wrote, pollution of many kinds made residents think twice about eating a fish they caught off the pier. Now he wrote that he could not stop thinking about all those miles and days of plastic. Over the decades, we'd gotten used to the sight of trash on the beach, by the roadsides, and in riverbeds, of shopping bags fluttering on fences and branches. But something seemed very wrong about this plastic trash in the mid-Pacific. He wanted to know why it was there. Oceanographer Curtis Ebbesmeyer offered Moore an explanation. Since the 1990s, Ebbesmeyer had studied how plastic trash moves through the ocean. He depended on a network of volunteers to report what trash washed up on shores. When containers of manufactured goods slipped off ships, Ebbesmeyer mapped the travels of their buoyant plastic contents to beaches around the world. In 1992, an accidental spill of thousands of plastic bath toys into the Pacific Ocean sent yellow ducks washing up along the U.S. West Coast and Hawaii. We always knew that this gyre existed, Ebbesmeyer said, but until the ducks came along, we didn't know how long it took to complete a circuit. For more than a decade, ducks traveled and landed on shores in South America, Europe, Australia, and even the Arctic. Ebbesmeyer realized that the 11 gyres in the world's oceans, along with the ocean's currents, work together like a giant conveyor belt, circulating seawater and everything floating in it. Ebesmeyer convinced Moore that a gyre's slow-moving water does not simply carry plastic bits of trash, it creates them. First, a gyre's currents work with a toilet bowl effect of dragging the debris from the rim and bringing it into the center, Moore said. But it never flushes, it just keeps adding and adding. In this trash vortex, plastic trash remains trapped for years. Under the sun's ultraviolet rays, plastic turns pale and brittle. It breaks apart in the salty water as waves jostle it endlessly. Gyres slowly shred plastic into bits called microplastics. More than 90% of the plastic at sea might be smaller than a grain of rice. Ebesmeyer has estimated that a 1-liter plastic bottle crumbles into enough microplastics to put one on every square mile of the world's beaches. This is our recording for the excerpt from Chapter 2 from Trash Vortex. Beginning in the 1950s, plastics trickled and then flooded into everyday life, replacing such materials as glass and expensive metals and rubber. Plastic took the shapes of countertops, clear plastic wrap for food, squeeze bottles, electrical plugs, telephones, toothbrushes, and even contact lenses and clear adhesive tape. Children assembled plastic building block sets and played with dolls modeled from plastic instead of fragile porcelain. One toy was simply a lump of plastic putty that playful hands could press, pull, and twist into endless shapes. Factories in the 1960s produced stackable chairs molded from a single piece of plastic. Plastics even ventured to the moon in the nylon threads of the flag planted by Neil Armstrong. Later, they traveled into the human body with the first artificial heart. Plentiful and affordable plastics helped shape a new lifestyle. They helped people of all incomes get more for their money. We were a nation of consumers now, a society increasingly democratized by our shared ability to enjoy the conveniences and comforts of modern life, wrote author Susan Frankel. Among the modern conveniences and comforts were dishwashers and air conditioners. Plastic offered another convenience. A 1955 article in Life magazine titled "Throwaway Living: Disposable Items Cut Down Household Chores" featured a photograph of a family tossing plates, cups, napkins, and more. "The objects flying through the air would take 40 hours to clean," said the caption, "except that no housewife need bother. They are all meant to be thrown away after use." By the 1960s, people were writing with disposable pens instead of refillable fountain pens, and drinking coffee from foam cups instead of ceramic ones that required washing. Yet, humans have always found new forms for old materials. Objects made of metal were repaired, or the materials used again. Worn-out clothing could be mended, redesigned, or shredded to make paper. But then it sometimes became cheaper to buy new plastic goods than repair old ones. The idea that you threw stuff out when it wore out is a 20th century idea, wrote Susan Strassler, author of Waste and Want, a social history of trash. Plastic trash started accumulating where trash always had, in waterways. From ancient Rome to some cities even today, foul-smelling sewage has polluted drinking water with diseases. Riverside factories have added industrial chemicals. Ohio's Cuyahoga River was so polluted with chemicals that it caught fire in 1969, catching the attention of government leaders. The Federal Clean Water Act added strict rules in 1972 on industrial plants along waterways, but wind and rain sweeps much plastic into waterways from small collections of trash on beaches, roadsides, and parks. Perhaps for a while we weren't as bothered as we might have been, Charles Moore reasoned, because we still thought plastic material was inert and benign, an eyesore that couldn't do much harm. Now we know better. This is a recording of Chapter 3 from Trash Vortex. Scientists gauging the amount of plastic in gyres have an unusual concern. They are finding too little. About 8 million tons, 7.3 million metric tons, of plastic enters oceans each year. Yet samples from shallow regions of the ocean suggest that as little as 40,000 tons, or 36,300 metric tons, of plastic floats in the ocean. 99% of our plastic is missing, said oceanographer Eric van Silbe. We know how much goes in, we know how much is on the surface. Where's the rest? The sun, waves, salt, and gyres have done their work well. Most of the plastic becomes microplastics. These plastics have probably already washed up on beaches, sunk to the seafloor, or been eaten. Scientists in Plymouth, England, worked with a nature film director in 2015 to make a startling video. Viewers saw not a seabird eating a pop bottle, but zooplankton eating plastic microbeads. 2 years later, a video camera equipped with a microscope recorded an arrowworm, a type of zooplankton, ingesting plastic microfibers, which caused a blockage. Once ingested by the tiny, transparent animal, plastic behaves much as a plastic bag does inside a sea turtle. When I saw it, I thought that here was something, visually, to convey to the public the problem of plastic in the sea, said Richard Kirby, a marine scientist who recorded the 2017 footage. What intrigues me is that because the fiber has made a loop inside the animal's gut, you can actually see the consequences of something as small as the arrowworm consuming microplastic. Each time a predator eats prey, plastic travels from one body to the next and forms an expanding collection. Sunlight, salt, and waves cannot dissolve plastic, and neither can stomach acid. That's why the ocean's largest and fastest predators, such as the 100-pound, 45-kilogram tuna Moore hooked on his 1997 journey through the gyre, can have plastics lodged in muscles and fat that earlier were plankton meals. But plastic's relentless journey does not end at the top of the marine food chain. There's another top predator in the ocean, it turns out, said marine ecologist Stephen Palumbi. That top predator, of course, is us. Studies show that microplastics lace 1/4 of the fish sold at seafood markets on both sides of the North Pacific Gyre in Indonesia and California. What goes into the ocean, said Erickson, goes into these animals and onto your dinner plate. It's that simple. Seafood, whether eaten raw or cooked, delivers many important nutrients to people's bodies. More than 2.5 billion people on Earth depend on seafood for protein. Proteins make up blood, bone, muscles, and brain cells and control the functioning of cells everywhere in the body. But when seasoned with microplastics, seafood can upset a body's delicate balance. The ocean is basically a toilet bowl for all of our chemical pollutants and waste in general, said Rochman. Dangerous chemicals hide inside meals of microplastics. Leaked into oceans through rivers, rainwater, groundwater, and dumping, chemicals attached to tiny plastic rafts for a ride through the world's currents and the food chain. Some of these passengers, molecules of PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls, were designed to resist high temperatures. One part of common devices, such as industrial equipment, televisions, and refrigerators, they were banned in 1979 because of fear that they cause cancer. Another hitchhiker on microplastics was banned in 1972 for the same reason. DDT, an insecticide, was designed to kill disease-carrying mosquitoes and insects that destroy crops. Like plastics, these chemicals do not dissolve away. The pollutants have been detected in human blood, and PCBs have even been found in shrimp-like animals living in the Mariana Trench, 36,000 feet or 11,000 meters below the surface of the Pacific Ocean. Even without hitchhiking chemicals, microplastics make toxic meals. To add toughness and flexibility, chemicals such as bisphenol A, BPA, and phthalates are added to plastics holding food and drink, such as baby bottles, soda bottles, juice box straws, and food can liners. but these artificial chemicals, when eaten or drunk, confuse some of the body's natural chemicals, called hormones. Hormones carry vital messages ranging from instructions telling the body how to grow and develop to messages that trigger emotions and feelings of hunger. Tests show that BPA levels in U.S. children are twice as high as those of older Americans who grew up with less plastic in their lives. Plastic that travels back to land as seafood competes in an unfortunate cycle. It's very convenient to roll your trash to the curb every week and have it disappear, but it's a magic trick. And there's really not very much magic, said Edward Humes, who has written the book about the history of garbage. We need to have less packaging, use less disposable items, use things that last longer, make purchasing decisions that are more studied, and less wasteful. In the United States, about half of the nation's trash is buried in landfills, where sturdy liners keep it from having contact with air and nearby soil. Liners also keep trash away from water flowing underground that eventually reaches the ocean. The other half of U.S. trash is recycled or burned to ashes. But for a third of the people living in the rest of the world, there is no waste management system. Plastic trash travels wherever wind and water take it. Not far from the western edge of the North Pacific Gyre, cockroaches retch and goats swarm over a mountain of trash near Jakarta, Indonesia. Every day, dump trucks dump 6,890 tons, or 6,250 metric tons more. Thousands of people, including children, live there. They dig through the trash, searching for glass, aluminum, and plastics to sell. They might earn 50 cents a day. No liners contain this growing heap or others in the crowded cities along the gyre. Cheap, single-use plastics flood into the Philippines, Vietnam, and Sri Lanka as large businesses based in developed countries collect profits. It's really about fairness, said environmental activist Matt Prindiville. If you make something, you need to take responsibility for the environmental and social impacts of that product. When consumer goods companies sell all of their products wrapped in packaging to developing countries that don't have any solid waste or recycling infrastructure, we have rivers of plastic that are literally flowing into the ocean. Scientists estimate that more than 100 million tons, 100 million metric tons, of plastic trash is already in the ocean. By 2050, the plastic in the ocean could weigh more than the fish that live there. At the end of the day, we have to remember that the ocean is always downstream, said conservation biologist Nicholas Malos. It may not reach the ocean today or tomorrow, but we know water flows downstream. We need to think about the items we are using not just on beaches, but also inland and communities far upstream as well. This is an excerpt from Chapter 4 of Trash Vortext. 13 years after Charles Moore's first voyage to the North Pacific Gyre, another catamaran sailed across the same trash vortex. Pastiki was built from over 12,500 used water bottles. The bottle craft traveled through the gyre not as trash, but as part of a headline-grabbing expedition with a message. Plastic is not the enemy, said environmentalist and expedition leader David de Rothschild. But it's our understanding of disposal and reuse that's to blame. Of the 9 billion tons, 8 billion metric tons, of plastic produced since 1950, just 2 billion tons, 1.8 metric tons, are still in use, a 2017 study found. That means that the rest of the plastic litters Earth as trash. A large study of the Atlantic and Arctic Oceans and the Mediterranean Sea in 2014 confirmed that a great deal of this plastic pollution is in the ocean. This survey has shown that human litter is present in all marine habitats, from beaches to the most remote and deepest parts of the oceans. Most of the deep sea remains unexplored by humans, and these are our first visits to many of these sites, but we were shocked to find that our rubbish has got there before us, said marine biologist Carrie Howell of England's Plymouth University. Could a vacuum cleaner suck up the plastic from an ocean surface the way a home vacuum cleaner cleans a carpet? Designers of solar-powered floating vacuums think so. Others believe ocean currents will naturally push and gather plastic against plastic barriers, where it can be transported to land for recycling. But Australian ecologist Chris Wilcox worries that it would be as if you were vacuuming your living room and I'm standing at the doorway with a bag of dust and a fan. You can constantly keep vacuuming, but you could never catch up. About 80% of the world's trash comes from land. How can it be prevented from slipping downstream? Scientists turn to nature for ideas. They marvel at nature's efficient system of handling waste. A dead whale or giant redwood tree does not lie on the seafloor or forest floor for centuries. An army of small microscopic organisms turns waste into energy in a form of recycling that means the food chain never ends. These decomposers break dead matter into nutrients and other chemicals, providing food for themselves and plenty to help new grasses or phytoplankton grow. Scientists have discovered, often by accident, that among nature's army of decomposers, some can almost miraculously biodegrade plastic. Wax-loving worms enjoy munching on plastic bags. Mealworms willingly feast on plastic foam. During digestion, these animals secrete enzymes to break down molecular bonds. Even tough plastic water bottles can turn into a meal for bacteria. These microbes use enzymes to cut up long polymers into bite-sized sections. Scientists admire how, in a world full of plastics, they have found ways to turn them into food. If you put a bacteria in a situation where they've only got one food source to consume, over time they will adapt to that, said microbiologist Enzo Palomo. I would not be surprised if samples of ocean plastics contained microbes that are happily growing on that material. Some scientists are not hopeful that biodegradation will solve the plastic problem. They wonder whether worm and bacteria appetites can keep up with the rapid production of plastic. They also wonder whether people will trust these new waste removal methods too much. The public thinks that biodegradability means if I throw it away, it will completely go away, said biochemistry professor Ramani Nayaran. They don't even know what going away means. Tracy Mincer, who studies plastics in the ocean at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution in Massachusetts, said he was impressed with the research on plastic-eating worms, but wondered how it will help. When I think it through, I don't really know where it gets us. I don't see how microbes degrading plastics is any better than putting plastic bottles in a recycling bin so they can be melted down to make new ones. Simply finding new ways to recycle plastic cannot solve the problem. Even trying to gather and recycle plastic in the gyres is like mopping up a leaking tap without fixing the tap itself, said oceanographer Eric Van Siebel. It's much better to do it as close to the source as possible before it has a chance to interact with marine life. In a grim reminder that plastic is leaking beyond the subtropics, a 2017 study found that microplastics in Arctic waters are a gyre-shredded collection from all over the world. That same year, the United Nations declared war on ocean plastic and asked countries to join the battle against single-use plastics. It is past time that we tackle the plastic problem that blights our oceans. Plastic pollution is surfing into Indonesian beaches, settling onto the ocean floor at the North Pole, and rising through the food chain onto our dinner tables, said Eric Solheim, UN Environment Director. We've stood by too long as the problem has gotten worse. It must stop.